Now, once upon a time, there was a prince named Philip, and he was 6 years old. And he lived with the king and queen in a castle in a kingdom. Now, Philip loved butterflies and birds and deer and rabbits and all the kind of creatures that lived in the forest. And he would go out of the castle into the forest to see them every day. But he always had one of his father's soldiers along with him to protect him, because the next kingdom over had a very mean king who lived there, and he wanted Philip's father's treasure. So Philip's father, the king, said, "You can't go out of the castle unless you have somebody with you, a soldier with you at all times to protect you." Well, Philip was very good about that, and usually there was a soldier to guard him. But one day, the castle doors, or the doors of the walls around the castle were open. And Philip slipped out because he saw a very beautiful butterfly, a big butterfly, flying along like this with big wings and blue and yellow and red coloring all over it. And he loved butterflies. So he followed the butterfly into the forest without a soldier to protect him. And he got a little way from the castle, and all of a sudden, out from behind a bush jumped a big man with a big sack, and he threw the sack over Philip, and he said, "I've gotcha." And he tied up the sack, put it over the shoulder, and marched away to the bad king's castle. Well, as he came to the bad king's castle, around that castle was a big ditch, and in the ditch was full of water, and in it were alligators and crocodiles to eat anybody who fell into the water. Well, a big drawbridge came down, and the man walked across the bridge into the castle and into the king's room. And he said, "Look what I have." And he dumped the sack upside down, and out fell Philip on the floor. And the bad king rubbed his hands together, and he said, "Ha ha! Now we can get the boy's father to give us all his treasure. Lock him up in the tower." And there was a huge tower that rose way up from the middle of the castle, very, very, very high. And so it had a staircase on the inside of the tower that went around and around and around. And a guard took Philip up the stairs all the way up to the top of the tower and pushed him in a room and locked the door. Well, Philip was in a room with a bed and a chair and 3 windows. But the windows had no bars on them. And he thought, maybe I can climb out the windows. But when he looked out the windows, it was a long, long, long way down, all the way down to the castle courtyard, and he couldn't climb down. Well, in the meantime, the bad king sent a messenger to the good king and said, "We've got Philip, and you have 3 days to send all your treasure over, or something bad is going to happen to Philip." Well, after the messenger left, the good king sent one of his very special men. He said, "Go spy out on the castle and see if you can figure out how we can rescue Philip. So that man went and hid outside the ditch, in the bushes outside the ditch of the Bad King's castle, and watched to see if there was any way to rescue Philip. Well, the first night went by, and Philip cried a little bit up in the top of the tower, but he was pretty sure something would happen and his dad would save him somehow. And that night he slept all night. And the next morning he heard clump, 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 and up the stairs came a guard who opened the door and shoved in a tray of food for him and slammed the door and locked it again. And on the tray was some soup that didn't taste very good and a piece of bread that didn't taste very good and a glass of water. Well, he was pretty hungry, so he ate them up. And then he sat on his bed and he looked out the window and he was hoping that something would come along and save him, but nothing happened all day. And that night he lay down on his bed and he went to sleep, and it got dark. And in the middle of the night, he woke up, and over at one of the windows was a teeny tiny little bit of light. And he watched, and the little bit of light went through the air here and there and here and there around the room, and then landed right on his shoulder. And he kind of tried to look over, and a little voice said, "I've come to help you." And it was a little teeny man, a fairy. And Philip said, "How can you help me?" And the little fairy said, "Well, when the man comes up, when the guard comes up with your food in the morning, you be ready to jump out the door and shut it behind him." And Philip said, "But the guard doesn't come into the room." And the little man said, "Don't worry. You'll see what I'm going to do. Now go back to sleep." And then the little bit of light flew away out the window. Well, just that morning, there was a little flash of light inside the room. And as it got to be morning, the little man was was right on the edge of the bed. And up the stairs came the guard, clump, 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 clump. And he pushed open the door and he said, "Here's your food." And just as he did that, the little man, the fairy, flew right up his nose, up the big nose of the man. And the man went, "Ah, ah, ah, achoo!" and gave a huge sneeze and stumbled right into the room because his sneeze was so big. And Philip was ready, and he ran out in the hall and slammed the door and locked it. And the man was trapped inside the room, and he started beating on the door. "Let me out, let me out, you can't lock me in here, let me out, let me out." But the tower was so high that nobody could hear him. And the little man was on Philip's shoulder, and he said, down the steps, and down they went, down to the bottom of the stairs. And there was a door out into the hallway. And Philip started to open the door, and the little man said, no, don't open the door. There's two big guards in armor outside on either side of the doorway. Let me take care of it. And so the little man flew under the bottom of the door and out into the hall. And there were two big guards facing each other with big beards and mean eyes, and they had helmets and armor on, and they had a big spear in one hand, and they had swords on their belts, and they stood across each other in the hallway looking at each other. And the little man flew up and pulled on the hair in one of the guard's ears really hard. And he goes, "Ow! Ow! What is that? Did you do that to me?" He stared at the other guard. And the other guard said, "No, I didn't do anything. I'm just standing here. I didn't do anything." And the little man flew over to him and pulled the hair on his ear very, very hard. And that guard said, "Ow, why are you doing that to me? I didn't do anything to you." And the first guard said, "I didn't do that. What are you talking about?" And then the little fairy flew over and pulled the first guard's hair on his ear. And he said, "You did it again. You did it again." And the second guard said, "No, I didn't do anything." And then the fairy flew over and pulled the hair on the second guard's ear. And he started screaming. And the first thing you know, they rushed across the hall at each other with a big crash of armor and started hitting each other and rolling around on the floor and yelling at each other for pulling the hair on their ears. And the little man flew under the door and said, "Open the door and run." And Philip opened the door and jumped over the fighting guards and ran down the hall with the little man right on his shoulder. And the little man said, "Turn right, turn right." And they turned right and ran down, and he could see the drawbridge was down across the ditch. And the two guards looked up just as he ran down the hallway, and they said, "He's escaping! He's escaping! The boy's escaping!" And soldiers came running from everywhere out of the castle and started chasing Philip and the little man. And the little man said, "Faster, faster." And Philip ran as fast as he could. And before they could pull the drawbridge up, he was on the drawbridge, but right behind him were three big soldiers ready to grab him. And the little man said, "Faster, faster." And Philip said, "I can't go any faster." And the little man said, "Okay." And he produced a banana peel and threw the banana peel under the feet of the men who were right on top of Philip. And they went, "Ah!" and crashed down on the bridge, and one of them almost fell into the alligators, and they started screaming and yelling. And while they were crashing around on the bridge, Philip ran across the bridge and up the road and started running toward his father's castle. Well, hiding in the bushes just up the road a ways was his father's special soldier, who ran out and said, "Philip, Philip, it's you," and grabbed him and took him off into the forest. And they hid until all the bad king's soldiers were gone. And then they went back to Philip's father's castle. And the man brought him up to Philip's father, and Philip's father, the king, said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you. I'm so glad to see you. How did you ever get out? We heard you were locked up in a tower." And Philip said, "Well, I had a special friend." And with that, a little flash of light flew off his shoulder and flew away way high up in the sky. And that is the end of the story. Did you like it? What was your favorite part? Do you think you could use your crayons or words to describe your favorite part? That would be a lot of fun, don't you think? And we'll see you the next time, okay?